before we leave here. Again, we support the President and his proposal, which is fair, which reduces the deficit, which creates jobs, and which will work for the American people. With that, I yield back the balance.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And with great respect to my dear friend, the gentlewoman from San Francisco and the minority leader, I'm delighted that she came down to engage us on this very important issue. The gentlewoman does recognize and know that the House on August 1st, in fact, did exactly what she is suggesting today, and that is to take action on what the future tax rates would be in this country. And on a bipartisan basis, 256 to 171, this House of Representatives said, let's understand that now is a bad time to raise taxes on the American people, and let's extend for a period of time all the what are known as the tax cuts, which allow America to keep working. And we passed it 256 to 171. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that I insert into the record a chart that exists on the House Budget Committee that shows the choice of the futures. And one future was presented, if I could. Thank you very much. This slide that I've got that's on the House Budget Committee is essentially about the current pathway as the President would choose, as outlined in his budget that the gentlewoman, Mrs. Pelosi, spoke of, that got no votes in the United States Senate. Not one vote. No votes here. The plan that the President has presented, which would substantially not just raise taxes, but substantially raise spending. If you isolate the President's ideas of simply raising taxes on the whatever he calls the top 2%, or those that have a household income of $250,000 and above, what you essentially do, Mr. Speaker, is very quickly lose 700,000 American jobs. And that's the answer that this administration fails to include in their talking points, that there's a huge impact. And part of that impact, Mr. Speaker, comes from the problem where dividends are those that money that comes back as a result of an investment would rise essentially from 15% to whatever a person's top tax rate is, meaning it could go at least under the scenario that the President wants to 39%. That means from 15 to 39%, that window, that value in between is what people reinvest in their companies. They reinvest that many times in small business, and that's the job creation element. When you make this rate go up, you arbitrarily take away some 700,000 American jobs that need current capital every day, a small business owner re-putting that money, reinvesting that money for the life of their business. And this is the part that we believe as Republicans, that we stand on the side of saying we shouldn't lose American jobs just for the sake of fairness, of what the President, of what the minority leader is down arguing for, of increasing taxes. So it's obvious to Republicans that what we believe we stand for is creation of jobs and making sure that that capital that's invested in the economy continues. I reserve my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves his time. The gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from South Carolina, the Assistant Democrat Leader, Mr. CLYBURN.
Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request permission to revise and extend.
Without objection.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding me this time. Mr. Speaker, When the so-called supercommittee failed last year to overcome the obstruction of the Tea Party Republicans and their leader, Grover Norquist, we achieved a fair and balanced plan for deficit reduction, economic growth, and job creation. I said it would take a decisive national election in order to settle the matter. I believe President Obama's victory on November 6 was very decisive and pretty definitive. During the campaign, President Obama very clearly laid out his vision, and the American people strongly affirmed his position. The President won all but one of the swing states, 62% of the Electoral College, and carried the popular vote by more than 4.5 million votes. Democrats added to our numbers in the House and Senate and captured the House popular vote by more than 1 million votes. In February 2010, President Obama began the process to reduce our deficit by establishing the Simpson-Bowles Commission. Since that time, many bipartisan groups have made recommendations on how to reduce the deficit, and they have all been in agreement. We need a balanced deal that requires shared sacrifice from all Americans, including the wealthy. In 2011, we began to reduce the deficit, but we did it entirely through spending cuts, over $1.5 trillion, and have asked nothing of the most fortunate. In 2012, the American people spoke. It is time for balance and shared sacrifice. And the first step is to allow the Bush tax cuts for income over $250,000 to expire. But that is a debate for another day. Now, we must do what we agreed on: extend the tax cuts for everyone on their first $250,000 of income. The proposals put forth by the Republicans since the election and their refusal to extend the middle-class tax cuts, which we all agree should be extended, are just more of the same obstructionism. The time for posturing is over. It's time for our House Republicans to accept the express will of the American people and get beyond their pledge to a special interest lobbyist here in Washington, D.C. Although, frankly, I fail to see how voting to cut taxes violates a pledge to never raise taxes. We need to defeat the previous question. Thank you.
Fired. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind the gentleman that Republicans have already passed the bill for the middle-class tax cut on August the 1st of this year, and it passed 256 to 171. We're now waiting for the Senate to act on that. I reserve my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I gladly yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, the Vice Chairman of the Democrat Caucus, Mr. Becerra.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. If you're in the middle class, shouldn't it feel like you're in the middle of America? Yet the politics of extremism is pushing the middle class to the very edge. The very edge. Our House Republican colleagues continue to ignore the calls from the American people to extend middle-class tax cuts now. That politics of extremism is threatening to raise taxes on the middle class by the amount of about $2,200 starting January 1st. Republicans should once and for all join with Democrats and the American public to bring the bipartisan Senate-passed middle-class tax cut bill to a vote on the House floor. Passage of the bipartisan middle-class tax cut bill ensures that 98% of Americans and 97% of small businesses don't see a single tax increase next year. Democrats and 2/3 of the American people agree with a growing number of Republicans who are telling their Republican colleagues, take the 98% deal. Take the 98% deal. My friends, this is not the time to put the foot on the economic recovery that we're beginning to experience, a foot on the brake of our economic recovery. It's time to get our work done. Remember, colleagues, where we were 4 years ago. 4 years ago, November 2008, our country was hemorrhaging 800,000 American jobs. This November, we got the news, 146,000 new jobs. It's time to continue that progress. Let's stop abiding by these pledges to special interests and start abiding by our pledge to the United States of America and to the people who elected us to serve the interest of all Americans, not those of special interests. Let's pass this middle-class tax cut bill now. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to just make sure that the speaker that was up here, Mr. Becerra, understands that on August the 1st of this year, we passed a bill to extend tax cuts for the middle class, 256 to 171. We've already done that, and it's now awaiting Senate approval. I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Speaker, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, the Democratic whip, Mr. Hoyer.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 3 minutes.
That's probably.
I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friend for yielding, and I want to thank the chairman of the Rules Committee for his efforts as well. Ladies and gentlemen of this House, we talked a lot correctly about creating certainty, alleviating uncertainty, alleviating angst among our people and among our economy. We have an opportunity to bring certainty to a large segment of America that they will not receive a tax increase on January 1st. We have that ability because the United States Senate has acted on a bill which will allow us to do that. Now, even if we don't take their bill up, we could take a bill that Tim Walz has introduced. Congressman Walz has introduced a bill which will say to the 98% that we've talked about, you won't get a tax increase. I think that we have agreement on that across, as the gentleman from Texas indicated, we have agreement on that. I think there's not anybody here, or very, very few at least, on either side of the aisle who doesn't say that those who are making $250,000 or less as families or $200,000 as individuals or less shouldn't get a tax increase. Now, there are some who say that those above should not get a tax increase either. I understand that. But we have disagreement on that. The American people are frustrated by the fact that even that on which we have agreement, we can't move. That's their frustration. They understand that we have policy differences, but they are hopeful that when at least we have agreement on an issue, that we can move it. And if we did so, think of the confidence, and Mr. Cole, had your job as the chairman of the campaign committee, said, let's pass this. Let's give the middle class, the working people of America, a Christmas present, a sense of certainty, a sense of self-confidence, a sense of well-being. That will be good for our economy, but certainly good for them individually and as families as well. So I would urge my colleagues on the Republican side and my colleagues on the Democratic side, vote against the previous question. Now, that's somewhat esoteric, and Mr. Speaker, those watching us probably, what does that mean, voting against the previous question? What's the previous question? That's some sort of political jargon that they use in Washington. What it means is, if we vote against the previous question, we will then bring forward, we will be empowered to bring forward the middle class tax cut bill. And we'll put it on the floor. And Mr. Walz will be our leader on this because he's put it in the hopper. May I have 30 additional seconds?
Another minute.
I thank the gentlelady very much for that. We'll put that on the floor. And every member of this House, all 400, and I guess there are 33 of us here now, 435 members, will have the opportunity to say to the American people, yes, yes. On December 12th, we're going to tell you that on January 1st, your taxes will not go up. Give us that opportunity. Give us that opportunity to say yes to the American middle class. Give us the opportunity to say yes to certainty in our economy. Give us the opportunity to say yes, we agree on something, and aren't you proud of the fact that when we agree, your Congress can act? Let's say yes. Vote no on the previous question, and then vote yes for the middle class. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I do appreciate the gentleman. My dear friend from Maryland, who I have not only regular conversations with but enjoy very much, I would once again remind the gentleman that on August the 1st of this year, we passed 256 to 171, an idea that would be about not losing 700,000 jobs by doing it the way that our friends the Democrats want to do it.
Will my friend yield for just 1 second?
I would for 15 seconds.
It's never wrong to do the right thing twice.
And I appreciate, gentlemen, reclaiming my time. It is wrong to lose 700,000 more American jobs. And that's the practical effect. And the gentleman also, and the minority leader was here, wanted to talk about, and our speakers all day, want to talk about this sequestration. The sequestration came as a result of a promise, a deal, an agreement that we as Republicans and House and Senate and the President agreed upon, that we would come to an agreement upon how to cut some spending. The President said it's absolutely essential. Now they want to back away from the deal. Well, here's what their deal is. Their deal is, among other things, and Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that I include in the record
without objection
a statement from the gentleman, Mr. Sam Graves, who's chairman of the House Committee on Small Businesses, the new taxes that will take place. Here's one of them that we know will happen already under law, is that Medicare dish payments paid to qualifying hospitals that serve low-income patients will be reduced by 75% starting October 1st, 2013. In addition to the $700 billion that will be transferred away from senior care. And I know we had an election where we talked about this, and one person tried to explain, well, that's not really right. Those were to a certain group of people that may be rich. But right here, to low-income hospitals. That means that we're going to have hospitals that no longer will serve seniors because their payment rate got cut by 75%. Tax increases on health care. Tax increases, as we learned yesterday or last week when it was announced, that all insurance plans will now be paying an extra $63. Well, those are passed on to customers, consumers. This is an outrageous government takeover of health care, and now what they want to do is diminish another 700,000 jobs. No, sir, we're not going to fall victim to that. I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentlelady from New York.
Let me yield myself 2 seconds to say it is not a government takeover of health care. It will be performed by private insurance companies, and I'm delighted to yield 2 minutes to my colleague and gentleman from New York, Mr. Crowley.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague from New York for yielding me this time. Ladies and gentlemen of America, this is not a mirage. We are actually here in this building, the U.S. Capitol. America, your Congress is in session, and we're here to work. Yet my Republican colleagues refuse to bring up the middle-class tax cut bill that is right behind me at this desk. Now, my colleague from Texas can continue to talk about what happened in August of this year. You know, staging votes for the election that took place, and we know the results of that election. What our constituents are concerned about is what happens in January if and when we fail to do our work here now. And also to expose that the vote that took place in August was a vote to continue the Bush-era tax cuts, the very same tax cuts that got us into the mess we're in right now. And they're doing that because they're holding hostage the 98% of Americans who will receive a tax cut under Mr. Walz's bill that's at the desk today. And they're holding them hostage to make sure that the 2%, the wealthiest 2%, continue to get that tax cut. Our economy is 70% driven by consumer driven. That means when the middle class spends more, we all benefit. When the opposite takes place, when they spend less, we all are worse off for it. Holding the middle class hostage by threatening to raise their taxes not only hurts the American families, but it also hurts America's businesses. I think we owe it to our constituents to take this one single vote, one vote to ensure the middle class won't be held hostage any longer. Well, thank you.
30 seconds.
One vote to give them the economic certainty that they so desperately need now. One vote to keep our middle class spending and investing in creating jobs for American businesses. But we can't do that, ladies and gentlemen of America, unless our Republican colleagues allow for Mr. Walz's bill, which is at our desk right now behind me, up for a vote on this floor. That's why I will vote against the previous question so that we can come back and have an opportunity to include Mr. Walz's bill in that package. We're here, we're ready, let's vote.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair will remind members to address their comments to the chair. The gentleman from Texas.
Well, thank you very much. The gentleman from New York, a very dear friend of mine, really, I think, got something wrong. What we're trying to extend is the law that President Obama signed into law as a result of bipartisan action 2 years ago, because 2 years ago, and the economy was better then than it is now, we were trying to extend the tax cuts that President Obama was asking us to do, and that's what we simply did in August again. So it is a President Obama last signed bill that we're trying to offer an extension of. I reserve my time.
One reserves his time. The gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Walz.
The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentlelady. Mr. Speaker, my discharge petition at the desk is really an approach that the American people spoke loudly in. Every single one of us just came through an election, and the message was abundantly clear to me. Why do you continue to bicker? Why do you continue to stand on the floor and make these ridiculous kabuki dance statements with one another when it shouldn't be that difficult? We came out of a constitutional convention, and when they asked James Madison what the secret to this new government was, compromise, compromise, compromise. Mr. Speaker, to sit here and do what we're doing, not bringing this forward and releasing the tension on the middle class, making sure the economy knows there's stability amongst taxes, is holding our economy back. And to be very honest, it's insulting to the American people. This is a nation that won 2 world wars. This is a nation that split the atom. This is a nation that put a man on the moon. This is a nation sending pictures back from Mars in Curiosity. You know what? Sign the discharge petition, bring it to the floor, get 435 votes, put it online for 24 hours, send it to the president, and by 3 o'clock tomorrow, the big chunk of the fiscal cliff is done. Don't insult the people with things that aren't true. Don't tell them that it's not about compromise. And don't sit here and pretend like we're working when we're not. They know better. They're smarter. They deserve better. Bring the discharge petition to the floor. Allow members to vote for it. Give the American people what they want, stability and a Congress that works, and let's move on to other pressing issues. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Texas. The gentleman reserves his time. The gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Andrews.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 2 minutes. Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a lot of disagreement about the future of our country. There's disagreement over how to handle spending, what should be cut, what should be reduced, what should be increased. There's disagreement over how much and when to raise the debt ceiling. These are very important questions. There's a disagreement over whether taxes should or should not go up on income over $250,000 a year. Our friends on the other side in good faith believe it's a bad idea. We know the economic history tells us that the last time the rates were at the level of 39.6%, 600,000 new businesses were formed and 23 million new jobs were created. So we think it works. But there's something that everyone says they agree on, and that is that income up to $250,000 a year should not have a tax increase. Everyone on both sides says that when January 1st shows up on the calendar, there shouldn't be a tax increase on the middle-class people of this country, that their first paycheck in the first Friday of the new year should not have more taken out of it so as not to hurt our economy or hurt those families. Now, we all say we agree on this. It seems to me the right course is to put a bill on the floor that says exactly that, that says that for income of less than $250,000 a year, the tax rates for every American should stay where they are now, and there should not be a tax increase. My friend from Texas says that the majority did that in July. That's not quite right. What the majority did in July was to keep the rates low for people making less than $250,000, but also keep them low for people making more than $250,000. We just don't agree with that. Why don't we take the 98% that we agree on and vote on it right now? I would ask for 15 more seconds.
30 seconds.
Gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
I thank my friend. If we don't do this 19 days from today, 98% of the American people, really 100% of the American people, get a tax increase. They have more taken out of their checks. And it will hurt shoppers in the stores, diners in the restaurants. It will hurt jobs across the country. So why don't we take the 98% that we agree on right now and put it on the floor right now? By voting no on the previous question, that's what we can do and should do. I yield back the balance of my time.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Texas.
Reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I am delighted to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, a member of the Rules Committee, Mr. McGovern.
Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the ranking member on the Rules Committee, Mrs. Slaughter, for yielding me the time. Mr. Speaker, I regret that my Republican friends are turning this House of Representatives into a place where trivial issues get debated passionately and important ones not at all. The bill that we are talking about right now on the House floor basically gives the majority who run this House the authority to bring up suspension bills from now until December 28th. Suspension bills, for those who don't know, are bills really of not much consequence, by and large. They're bills that most of the time can pass by a voice vote. Last night in the Rules Committee, the distinguished ranking member, Mr. Slaughter, suggested that instead of doing suspension bills, we ought to be doing bills of some consequence, like reauthorizing the Violence Against Women's Act, doing postal reform, doing a farm bill, or what we're talking about right now is passing a middle-class tax cut extension. Those are real things that mean real things to real people in this country. And yet, we're not talking about any of those things. We're talking today about basically doing not much of anything between now and December 28th. Last night in the Rules Committee, we were told, well, you know, we're trying to negotiate a deal on this fiscal cliff. Well, the reality is that there are a few members of this House who probably are in discussions with the White House about trying to work out a deal. But the vast majority here, Democrats and Republicans, are being asked to do nothing. Last night, we came back and we voted on one bill to approve the journal. That's all we had to do last night, to approve the journal. We haven't reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act. We haven't extended the middle-class tax cut. We haven't reauthorized the farm bill. I go on and on and on. But we had to come back to vote on have a journal vote last night. The time has come for us to get back to work. The election was clear. The election was clear. The views advocated by Governor Romney and the Republican majority were rejected. The President won comfortably. And the Democrats won more seats in the Senate. We won more seats here in the House. I think it's a pretty clear message that the American people think that, we ought to do what's right in terms of balancing the budget, and that is ask the Donald Trumps of the world to pay a little bit more. We have already cut, as you said, gentlemen, $1.5 trillion in discretionary spending. A lot of those cuts are in programs that I think help people. So $1.5 trillion in discretionary spending already cut, and my friends on the Republican side are saying, but Donald Trump can't pay one penny more. Give me a break. Give me a break. This is about fairness. This is about justice. This is about doing the right thing. And at the very minimum, we should be debating now not suspension bills, but we should be debating the extension of the middle-class tax cut. That is why we need to vote no on the previous question, to allow us to bring this bill to the floor. If my Republican friends say they agree with us on the middle-class tax cut, fine, let's vote it. Vote overwhelmingly for it. You don't have to agree on everything to agree on something. Let's give the middle class certainty. Let's vote no on the previous question. I yield back my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the gentleman, my friend, who formerly was the Vice Chairman of the Rules Committee. I'd like to remind him that when he was the Vice Chairman of the committee, almost half of the 3,075 bills considered under suspension in the 110th and 111th Congress were for post offices and federal building namings or resolutions or things just to, like National Pollinators Week. And what we're trying to talk about is, at the end of the year, since we're going to be here waiting for the big deal, that we're going to make sure that we can take ideas that still exist and reside on a bipartisan basis.
Will the gentleman yield 10 seconds?
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentlelady from New York.
Let me yield Mr. McGovern 10 seconds.
Yeah, I just want to say, when we were in charge, we were able to walk and chew gum at the same time. And we passed some pretty important substantive legislation that I'm proud of. We should be talking about real things that matter to real people right now instead of just extending the suspension authority. I yield back.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I urge my colleagues to vote no on the previous question. The message from my constituents and from the American people is loud and clear, and that's to extend the middle-class tax cuts now. And Republicans are simply holding hostage tax cuts for 98% of Americans and 97% of small businesses to give more tax breaks to the wealthiest Americans. Now, Democrats have a common-sense solution, and we can't wait around any longer as real proposals languish while the House GOP gets its act together. Spearheaded by Congressman Waltz, Democrats last week filed the Waltz discharge petition to automatically bring to the floor the Senate-passed middle-class tax cuts, which the President has said that he will sign immediately. And overwhelmingly, members have signed this discharge petition. My point is, we don't have any time to waste. We can pass this extension of the middle-class tax cuts now as we find a bold and balanced and fair agreement to avoid the fiscal cliff. But there is a consensus that we do this. So why are the Republicans holding this hostage? Once again, let us vote no on the previous question. Let's bring this middle-class tax cut up now. It is the solution.
I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentlelady from New York.
I have no further request for time, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if my colleague is prepared to close.
I thank the gentlewoman for asking. I have no further speakers and will allow her that opportunity, and then I will close.
All right. Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, we should be doing one thing today, and that's passing the continuation of tax cuts for the middle class. The American people couldn't be more united in their support for a tax cut, and there's no reason for delay. The Senate has already passed the bill that we could take up now. It's here at the desk. Members from across our aisle agree, quite intelligently, that we must not let those middle class and below tax status go up. With such common ground, why would the majority waste another minute before ensuring that the taxes will not go up on the middle class? The answer isn't clear to me. I simply cannot fathom it. But if the majority won't take action, we will. Mr. Speaker, if we defeat the previous question, I'm going to offer an amendment to the rule. It says two things. One is first that we will pass the bill to extend the middle-class tax cuts, and second, that we will pass legislation that will avoid the fiscal cliff and the chaos that would ensue. And I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of my amendment to the rule in the record, along with extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
Without objection, so ordered.
So, Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote no to defeat the previous question so that we may put our rule on the floor. I urge a no vote on the rule if we are unsuccessful and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my friend, the gentlewoman from New York, for this vigorous debate that we had on the floor today. Mr. Speaker, top to bottom, the leadership of the Democratic Party has been on record here again today saying they want to increase taxes on small business. They want to increase taxes on family-owned businesses and people who get up every day and want to employ people and work harder. Small business is the engine of our economy, and our friends the Democrats want to punish them through taxes for fairness issues. Well, I'd like to say, Mr. Speaker, we got a bunch of problems in this country, and that's why we're at the fiscal cliff. This thing is not as a result of taxes. It's as a result of spending and too many people not having jobs to be able to pay in not just their taxes, but to be able to sustain our economy. And so we have millions of people that are unemployed and drawing unemployment compensation. We're seeing disabilities rise at a rate of 16% every year. One thing which we note that just before President Obama took effect, White House figures show the federal budget was $2.9 trillion. Next year's estimate is going to be $3.8 trillion. This is a 31% increase in spending in just 4 years. We have someone as president, our great president, who is hung up on taxing and spending. What we need is a House of Representatives that's hung up on jobs and job creation, the American product, entrepreneurship, creativity, competition with the world, the next new great ideas, not that will come from this body, but from the creativity of the American people. This is what Republicans are trying to keep alive in our country. The idea of self-reliance and working hard and taking care of people that are not just in your house but are in your neighborhood, your cities, our states, our vibrancy of our country. And we are headed over the fiscal cliff after 4 years of leadership from this president who is running directly to the fiscal cliff, and he has even said, and the Secretary of Treasury said, we don't mind jumping off this cliff. Mr. Speaker, we should not be having that kind of attitude. We should have the attitude that we're for everybody. We want to be for American entrepreneurship and especially small business, because it's small business, family farms, small business electrical companies, people who put their name on the buildings, creativity people get up and go to work every day. That's who we're going to hurt. And we're going to not just hurt them, we're going to hurt their business families, people who they have had employed, small communities, large communities, but small business, which is the engine of our economy. That's really who we're going to punish. Lastly, we should not do it at this time, just like we should not have 2 years ago. But I guess we were aiming for an election at that time, and now the President does not have one ahead of him. Mr. Speaker, I encourage yes vote on the rule and yield back the balance of my time and move the previous question.
Gentleman's time has expired. The questions on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. Gentlelady from New York.
Speaker, on that I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those requesting the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing. A sufficient number having arisen. The yeas and nays are ordered pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20. Further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered, or on which votes occur. The vote incurs objection under Clause 6 of Rule 20. Recorded votes on postponed questions will be taken later. For what purpose does the gentlelady from West Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill, H.R. 5817, as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 5817, a bill to amend the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act to provide an exception to the annual privacy notice requirement.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlelady from West Virginia, Ms. Capito, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentlelady from West Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members will have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to add extraneous materials on this bill.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. The amended version of H.R. 5817 represents compromise language that addresses concerns raised by some members about the last section of the bill, which provided certain regulatory relief to state-licensed financial institutions. The bill before the House today is substantially the same as the legislation that passed the House by voice vote in April 2010, and we actually debated this bill a week ago. I would like to thank the sponsors of the bill, H.R. 5817, Mr. LUETKEMEYER, Mr. Sherman, Ms. Maloney, and Mr. Capuano, and Mr. Frank for agreeing to this compromise language. With that, I would like to reserve the balance.
Gentlelady from West Virginia reserves her time. The gentleman from California.
I'll be brief. We passed substantially the same language unanimously by voice vote 2 years ago. This bill has been amended by unanimous consent so as to be virtually identical with what was passed 2 years ago. It now has the support of the ranking member. I urge and I vote and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentlelady from West Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to yield 3 minutes or as much time as he needs to consume from the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. LUETKEMEYER, who is the primary sponsor of this bill.
The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Chairman Capito, for yielding. I rise today in strong support of the amended version of H.R. 5817, the Eliminate Privacy Notice Confusion Act. Under current law, all financial institutions are required to provide annual privacy notices explaining information sharing practices to customers. Banks and credit unions are required to give these notices each year, even if their privacy notice have not changed. This creates not only waste for financial institutions, but confusion among and increased costs to consumers. In his book entitled The Financial Crisis and Free Market Cure, John Allison reports that one bank offered at the end of its privacy notice to pay $100 to any customer that read its notice in full. Only one customer took the bank up on that offer. Year after year, millions of dollars are spent on privacy notices that are either disregarded or by confusing the customers. Let's think about this cost for a second. This outdated requirement doesn't cost only in postage alone, but also costs in compliance costs, cost of supplies, printing fees, and man hours. I talked to one community bank in my district that said they spent roughly 70 cents per disclosure. With a minimum of 250,000 accounts and customers, this one bank spends $175,000 a year on this requirement. It may not seem like a lot of money to some of my colleagues, but I can tell you that $175,000 is a lot of money for a small institution like this one in my district, especially when a lot of those costs are passed on to the customer. There is some debate over what this legislation will do. Let me be completely clear. This legislation will only remove the Graham-Leach-Bliley annual privacy notice requirement of an institution if an institution has not in any way changed its privacy policy or procedures. This legislation does not exempt any institution from an initial privacy notice, nor does it allow a loophole for an institution to avoid issuing an updated notice. We worked in a bipartisan fashion to amend this legislation to remove the stipulations for state-regulated financial institutions. The amended language is now identical to the legislation passed by the House by a voice vote in the 111th Congress. Additionally, I would like to remind my colleagues that similar language that was the basis for the first version of legislation, passed in both the 109th and 110th Congresses. This language is not controversial, does not jeopardize consumer privacy, and it does not exempt any institution from having to produce an initial or amended privacy notice. This legislation does eliminate millions of costly, confusing, and often ignored mailings. And as with the passage of this bill, the information included in these mailings would likely become more significant to the consumer because it would come only after a change in the privacy policy. This legislation is supported by the Independent Community Bankers of America, Credit Union National Association, the American Bankers Association, National Association of Federal Credit Unions, and the Consumer Bankers Association, among others. I'd like to thank the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, for his work on this bill. I'd also like to thank Chairman Baucus, Ranking Member Frank, Chairman Capito, Ranking Member Maloney for their work with us toward a swift passage of legislation. With that, Mr. Speaker, I ask my colleagues for their support, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from California.
I want to thank the gentleman from Missouri for his work and leadership on this bill. I want to also thank the ranking member, Mr. Frank, for his support, and of course the gentlelady from West Virginia. If this bill becomes law, a written copy of the privacy policy will still go by postal mail to every customer when he becomes a customer or she becomes a customer of the financial institution. Another copy will go every time that policy is changed, and the policy will be available day and night on the Internet, on the website of the financial institution. The privacy policy will be known to everyone who has an interest in reading it, whether $100 is paid as a bonus for reading it or not. With that, I have no speakers. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from California yields back his time. The gentlelady from West Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also would urge passage of this bill, and with that, I would yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 5817 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. You should know that we have a... Does the gentleman from Texas seek... Oh. Gentleman will suspend. Oh, it looks like Pallone. Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 6190.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 485, H.R. 6190, a bill to direct the Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency to allow for the distribution, sale, and consumption in the United States of remaining inventories of over-the-counter CFC epinephrine inhalers.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Burgess, and the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone, will each control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
I thank the Speaker for the recognition. I yield to myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
H.R. 6190. This is a bill that I honestly wish we did not have to consider today. Over the past several years, I have repeatedly asked the Food and Drug Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, and even the White House, the President himself, for answers to questions that I and other members of the committee have as to why the administration has refused to grant a waiver to sell the existing stock of over-the-counter epinephrine inhalers. Only last summer, and because the committee was moving legislation at the time, did the Food and Drug Administration finally provide at least some sort of response, albeit one that was entirely unsatisfactory. Under the rules known as the Montreal Protocol, certain chemical propellants used in a number of medical and cosmetic devices were to be phased out over a number of years. The chlorofluorocarbon, CFC, used in the epinephrine inhalers, here is one of the ones that was one of those propellants. Knowing that the manufacturer of these over-the-counter inhalers has worked on a replacement inhaler only to meet with stonewalling through the Food and Drug Administration and requests for more studies into the device. Although the Food and Drug Administration claims they are awaiting an application from the company counters that the Food and Drug Administration once again continues to move the goalposts. But regardless of the finger-pointing, Mr. Speaker, and there is much of it surrounding this issue, the fact remains there is no viable alternative for the over-the-counter purchase by an asthmatic suffering from an acute emergency attack. Now, we've heard that a company is about to market a device, and indeed there is a device available without a prescription, but it's behind the counter. In other words, if the pharmacy is open but the pharmacist is not there, you cannot purchase this device. I know this firsthand because it happened to me one evening while we were home on one of the district work periods. The new product uses a nebulizer rather than a propellant. It's a little more complicated. In my experience, it's a little more difficult to use and less effective, but nevertheless, it is available. But the cost differential is significant when compared with the old over-the-counter CFC propellant epinephrine inhaler. The committee and the Congress should be on the side of putting more available products into the hands of patients and allow them to effectively manage their medical issues. Instead, opponents of this legislation hide behind false claims of safety, the safety and efficacy of epinephrine. And Mr. Speaker, I would point out that I've been an asthmatic my entire life. I have utilized rescue inhalers for a long time. Racemic epinephrine, the active pharmaceutical ingredient in an over-the-counter asthma inhaler, has been around for 60 years. There has not been a question of its safety and efficacy. If so, we know the FDA has the power to remove a drug or device that they think is unsafe or not effective. They have given their stamp of approval to racemic epinephrine again and again over the last 60 years. There continue to be dozens of epinephrine-based treatments for asthma-related issues that are used by doctors and medical professionals. Although opponents of this legislation will claim that they are opposed to the bill because epinephrine is not safe, this claim is simply not true. There are currently over 1 million units of these inhalers sitting in a warehouse in California, not helping patients currently suffering from an asthma attack, not available for a rescue treatment for someone who cannot get their breath. It's unconscionable to allow them to sit, gathering dust, when they could be used to provide relief to America's asthmatic patients. Moreover, the company is committed to donating any proceeds from the sale to charity to remove any possible profit motive from their request to sell these products. This is not about allowing a company to continue to sell their product. It's about not allowing a regulatory agency to unreasonably restrict the access of America's asthmatics to a useful product. I wish more companies would come forward with a viable over-the-counter asthma inhaler so that asthmatics could have more and more choices instead of that costly emergency room visit at 2 a.m. This bill is about allowing asthmatics to continue to get relief during an asthma attack, to continue to have an emergency rescue inhaler available when they need it, when they deem that they need it, not when the administrator of the EPA says they need it, not when the administrator of the FDA says they need it. Members of Congress spend a lot of time talking about how much they care about the plight of patients, and asthmatics in particular, and decrying the high cost of health care. Well, this bill returns, even if it's just for a limited time, this bill returns a safe, effective, and inexpensive treatment into the hands of patients suffering from asthma, one that has been in use for decades. For me, at least, the issue is clear. Let's side with patients on this issue. Let's stop this senseless war on asthmatics the administration has waged for the last 3 years. And I'll reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves his time. The gentleman from Jersey. Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I claim the time in opposition to this bill, and I want to yield 4 minutes to the chairman of the ranking member of the Health Subcommittee of Energy and Commerce, Mr. Pallone from New Jersey.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague, the ranking member from California, Mr. Waxman. Congress gave FDA the responsibility of deciding whether specific types of inhalers containing ozone-depleting substances are essential uses and need to remain on the market. and FDA has established an orderly and open process for making these determinations. 13 types of inhalers containing CFSs were phased out prior to the phase-out of Primatene Mist. The remaining 2 CFC-propelled inhalers are scheduled for phase-out at the end of 2013. Now, FDA determined in 2008 that Primatene Mist was not an essential use. They concluded that there are no substantial technical barriers to developing epinephrine inhalers that do not release ozone-depleted substances. At the request of Armstrong, the manufacturer of Primatene Mist, FDA set a phase-out date of December 31, 2011, 1 year longer than FDA initially proposed. FDA took steps to prepare the public for the phase-out. It approved a label for Primatene Mist indicating to consumers that Primatene Mist would not be available after December 31, 2011. And Primatene Mist was phased out on that date. It has not been available for the past 11 months. Now, this bill would intervene to put Primatene Mist back on the market. It is a legislative earmark that directly benefits just one company, Armstrong. A long list of public health groups, physician organizations, and patient advocates oppose this bill. They do not believe that returning Primatene Mist to the market is in the best interest of patients with asthma or the public health. The following organizations, Mr. Speaker, wrote to members of the House opposing this bill: the American Lung Association, the American Thoracic Society, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America, Mothers of Asthmatics, and I could go on. There are 8 other public health organizations on this one letter alone. I'm not aware of any public health organization that supports this bill. And when FDA officials briefed members, they expressed many of the same concerns about patient confusion and Primatene Mist no longer being the standard of care for asthma patients. Now, let's be clear, Mr. Speaker. Every public health group and patient advocacy group that has looked at this bill has concluded that it is a bad idea. Congress shouldn't be overriding FDA's established regulatory process if doing so would cause significant patient confusion and undermine public health. That's just common sense. And I would say that even if we pass this bill, it would not lead to the widespread availability of Primatene Mist sought by proponents of the legislation. According to Armstrong, between 2 and 3 million people used Primatene Mist before the phase-out, but fewer than 1.5 million Primatene Mist inhalers remain in Armstrong's inventory. That means that as many as half of all previous users of Primatene Mist would not be able to obtain even one inhaler if Armstrong was allowed to sell off its remaining inventory. And that assumes that pharmacies or drugstores would even carry it. Retailers may decide not to sell inventory units of Primatene Mist because the units will start to expire in January. And that's only a few weeks from now, Mr. Speaker. So the real effect of this bill would be to provide a regulatory earmark to Armstrong rather than a rescue inhaler that would be available in the middle of the night to someone suffering from an asthma attack. So I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, I don't know what else I can say. This is a bad bill. I urge my colleagues to oppose it. I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll yield myself 1 minute. I would point out that the FDA has not retracted the use of racemic epinephrine for the short-term use of a rescue inhaler in the treatment of an acute asthmatic attack. That just simply has not happened. And to say that Congress is now seeking to overrule the FDA is just simply preposterous, because that is not the facts on the table right now. A regulatory earmark? Come on, give me a break. I would welcome other companies into the marketplace that wanted to create a low-cost, effective, convenient treatment for asthmatics who need an acute respiratory relief when their standard meds, when their meds that they take on a chronic basis either are not working or for whatever reason a flare-up has occurred. Look, I'm an asthma patient. I'm on asthma medicine. But in the product information provided to patients on the long-term medicine is this a statement that this is not intended as a rescue device for an acute attack. For that, you need something that was previously available over the counter. There's no reason for Congress to tell patients. I mean, I got to tell you, I was astounded by the elitism at the table in front of us by the EPA when they told us that they know better than America's asthma patients. Come on, this is the land of liberty. Let's give patients the devices they need to manage their illness. I'll reserve the balance of my
Gentleman
time.
reserves. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may
Gentleman's
consume.
recognized.
My colleagues, this is a bill that is special for one company to sell off the batches of the Primatene Mist that they have on stock. This is a product that's not on the market now. It was taken off the market, and there are substitutes on the market that the public health and medical groups say is far better and are far safer. There are a large number of organizations that have come to the fore on this bill to oppose it. The Energy and Commerce Committee, heard expert medical testimony that Primatene Mist is not safe or recommended for treating asthma. And we have a chart here. These are the groups that oppose this bill and urge you to vote no. The Lung Association, the Thoracic Society, the American Academy of Pediatrics, Asthma and Allergy Foundation. All the people involved in health are saying they don't want this drug on the market. It will only confuse asthma patients. It is not the safest drug that they could have. Now, the gentleman from Texas has said, well, what we ought to do if it's not safe is take it off the market. It is off the market. It hasn't been taken off because of safety, but it is not recommended by the medical community. There's another group here called the Alliance for Responsible Atmospheric Policy, and I'd like to indicate some of the organizations that are part of that alliance, some of the major corporations in this country. And then lastly, I want to show a chart of those who are in favor of this bill. Armstrong Pharmaceuticals, the one company that will benefit from this bill because they'll be able to sell off the reserves of their product. Now, is that in the best interest of the patients? Is that what Congress ought to be doing, passing a special earmark bill to favor one company to be able to take the rest of its stock and sell it to people? We do have a Food and Drug Administration, and we do have an Environmental Protection Agency, and we've delegated to them the responsibility to protect the public health, to make sure that drugs are safe and effective. And this Primatene Mist was supposed to come off the market, and it was given an additional year. Other companies were also going to have to come off the market. They knew that, and they're not on the market now. So why should we take one company's drug and put it back on the market so they could sell off the products that they still have in their backlog? In fact, those companies are against this bill, as you might imagine. They say it would overturn an established regulatory framework to directly benefit just one company, Armstrong. Over the years, more than a dozen types of inhalers containing CFCs have been phased out. But these companies say, why should we do something special for only one company? We're talking about not just the health groups, but drug companies like AstraZeneca, GlaxoSmithKline. They oppose this bill because it provides one company with special treatment that none of these other companies receive. There's no reason for this bill. This is a drug that is already off the market. There are substitutes that are being developed. There are substitutes already on the market. I don't think we ought to be using the suspension calendar of all places, of all procedures, to give a special deal to just one company. I urge members to oppose the bill and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Texas.